Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling really one of the most vital and, let's face it, difficult topics in medicine, the ethics around research that involves human subjects.
Absolutely. And at its core, you've got this inherent tension. There's the drive for scientific knowledge, which is crucial.
Right, finding out what works.
But then there's also beneficence, that deep-seated need to act for people's good for the patient right in front of you.
And it's where those two things collide, isn't it? The need for data versus the duty to care for the individual. That's where the tough ethical questions pop up.
Exactly. Our source for this, Chapter 6 of Lewis Vaughn's Bioethics, really lays it out. Human research has given us incredible advances, vaccines, treatments, you name it.
Huge progress.
But it's also been marked by some truly shocking moral failures.
Yeah.
Outrageous, really.
So our mission today is to unpack all of that for you. We want to give you a clear view of this landscape, the science involved, the key ethical principles, the history that shaped the rules, and the philosophical arguments behind it all. Make it clear and accessible.
And you really can't grasp the rules, the why behind them, without facing that dark history first.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, you have to start with the atrocities during World War II, right? The Nazi experiments.
Yeah, horrifying stuff. We're talking about experiments on prisoners without any consent, studying freezing, high altitudes, poisons, infecting people with diseases like typhus. Just brutal.
Pseudoscience, really, and utterly unethical.
And the trial of those doctors at Nuremberg afterward, in 1947, that was a turning point.
Definitely.
What came out of that directly led to the Nuremberg Code and its absolute core principle, the need for voluntary consent. Non-negotiable. That was the first big stake in the ground, ethically speaking.
But these kinds of moral disasters weren't just happening over there or only during wartime. The U.S. had its own major scandal with the Tuskegee Syphilis Study.
Oh, absolutely. That ran for an unbelievable 40 years, from 1932 to 1972.
40 years.
Yeah, involving around 600 poor black men in Alabama. They had syphilis, but they were studied basically without being properly treated.
And the deception, that's key here.
Profound deception. They were told they were being treated for bad blood. They were never told they actually had syphilis. And the worst part...
Penicillin.
Exactly. Penicillin became the standard effective cure in the mid-40s. But it was deliberately withheld from these men.
Just so researchers could see what untreated syphilis does over time, it's staggering, a massive failure of justice.
And it wasn't just Tuskegee. The sources mention other abuses too, like Cold War radiation experiments on people who hadn't consented, sometimes involving high doses.
And the Willowbrook study?
Right? Deliberately infecting children with intellectual disabilities, children living in an institution with hepatitis. Again, all in the name of research.
It's these kinds of, well, horrors that force the development of stricter ethical codes. You mentioned Nuremberg. There was also the Declaration of Helsinki from the World Medical Association.
And critically in the U.S., the Belmont Report, which came out in 1979. These form the ethical foundation we rely on today. Minimum standards.
Okay, so that's the crucial historical context, the why. Now, let's talk about the how the actual scientific process these rules govern clinical trials.
Right. Clinical trials are basically scientific studies designed to see if a medical intervention, a drug, procedure, whatever, is actually safe and effective. They give us the best evidence.
Gold standard.
Pretty much. And to get that reliable evidence, they have to be designed really carefully to avoid bias. That starts with having different groups.
The experimental group and the control group.
Exactly. The experimental group gets the new thing being tested. The control group gets something else, so you have a comparison point.
And that control is needed partly because of the placebo effect, right? People can feel better just thinking they're getting treatment.
Precisely. So sometimes the control group gets a placebo, like a sugar pill, a sham treatment. That's a placebo-controlled trial.
Or sometimes they get the current best treatment already available.
Yes, that's an active controlled trial. You're comparing the new thing to the existing standard.
And you also need to control for bias in how results are interpreted. That's where blinding comes in.
Yep. In a single-blind trial, the subjects don't know if they're getting the real treatment or the control. In a double-blind trial, which is often preferred, neither the subjects nor the researchers interacting with them know who's in which group.
Prevents expectations from skewing the results on either side.
Exactly. And one more crucial piece, randomization.
Ah, yes, randomly assigning people to the different groups. Why is that so fundamental?
Well, randomization helps ensure the groups are as similar as possible from the start in terms of age, health status, everything. It minimizes the chance that any difference you see at the end is due to something other than the treatment itself.
Makes the comparison fair and the results trustworthy.
Right. If the groups weren't comparable, you wouldn't know if the new drug worked or if, say, the people in that group were just healthier to begin with. It also prevents researchers from consciously or unconsciously putting certain patients into the group they think will do better.
Got it.
Mm.
And this whole process, especially for drugs, happens in stages or phases.
That's right. Phase I is usually small, focused squarely on safety. Is it tolerated? What are the side effects? What's the right dosage range? It's typically non-therapeutic, meaning the participants aren't really expected to benefit medically themselves.
So the risk-benefit calculation there is really critical.
Very. Phase 2 expands things a bit, looking for preliminary signs of effectiveness and refining safety data in a slightly larger group.
In phase 3, that's the big one.
That's usually the large-scale trial, often involving hundreds or thousands of people. This is where you definitively compare the new treatment to a placebo or the standard treatment to see if it's truly effective. This phase is generally considered therapeutic. There's an expectation of potential benefit for participants.
Okay. And sometimes there's a phase 4 after the drug is approved.
Yeah, post-marketing surveillance, looking at long-term effects, used in different populations, that sort of thing.
So across all these phases, there are basic moral requirements that have to be met. Our source lists 5 key ones.
Let's tick them off. 1. Informed voluntary consent. Absolutely essential.
2. Minimize risks and make sure the potential benefits outweigh those risks, an acceptable risk-benefit ratio.
3. Fair selection of subjects. Avoid exploiting vulnerable groups or unfairly excluding others who could benefit.
4. Protect privacy and confidentiality. Keep personal information safe.
And 5. Independent review. Research plans have to be reviewed and approved by an ethics committee, usually called an Institutional Review Board or IRB.
And those 5 practical requirements, they all flow from 3 broader ethical principles outlined in that Belmont Report we mentioned earlier.
Right. The first is autonomy, or respect for persons. Basically, treat individuals as capable of making their own choices, which points directly back to informed consent.
Makes sense. Second.
Beneficence, the obligation to do good, to maximize benefits, and crucially, to minimize harm. It's that classic do no harm idea from Hippocrates.
And the third pillar.
Justice. This is about fairness, fair distribution of the burdens and benefits of research, treating equals equally.
Okay. Autonomy, beneficence, justice. Sounds straightforward enough. But this is where we hit that core conflict again, particularly with beneficence and those controlled trials.
Exactly. The big ethical worry is, if you put someone in a control group, especially a placebo group, are you failing in your duty of beneficence? Are you withholding potentially better treatment? Are you using that person merely as a means to get scientific data?
That feels like a direct clash with the doctor's primary duty to the patient.
It does. And this leads us straight into the debate around equipoise.
Equipoise, meaning being genuinely uncertain.
Sort of. It means being rationally balanced between the alternatives being tested. If a doctor truly believes, or even just strongly suspects, that the new treatment is better than the control, how can they ethically assign their patient to the control group by chance?
This was the argument made by the Hellmans, wasn't it? That physicians owe patients their best judgment.
Yes. They argued that if a doctor has even a hunch, a clinical suspicion, that one treatment is superior, they can't ethically randomize. Doing so would violate their duty, their fidelity, to that specific patient. Which, if taken literally, could make almost any randomized controlled trial impossible. Doctors usually have some leaning.
Precisely. It seemed like a dead end for RCTs. But then Benjamin Friedman came along with a really important refinement. He proposed the idea of clinical equipoise.
Clinical equipoise. How is that different?
Friedman argued the relevant uncertainty isn't the individual doctor's private doubt or hunch. It's whether there's genuine disagreement within the expert medical community about which treatment is preferable.
So it's about the consensus or lack thereof among experts based on the available evidence.
Exactly. As long as there's honest professional disagreement among the experts because the evidence isn't clear yet, then randomization is ethical because from the community's perspective, we genuinely don't know which is better. No patient is being knowingly assigned to a proven inferior treatment. That's a clever and, frankly, crucial distinction. It allows research to proceed while still respecting the ethical core.
It really saved the ethical basis for RCTs. But this tension flares up again with placebo controls, especially when an effective treatment already exists.
Right, the Declaration of Helsinki is pretty clear on that. Using a placebo is unethical if there's already a proven effective therapy available.
Which brings us to the AZT trials in the late 90s, a really contentious case.
This was about preventing mother-to-child HIV transmission.
Yes, a specific regimen known as ACTG 076 had already been proven highly effective in developed countries like the U.S. It was complex and expensive, though.
Okay, so the controversy was
Researchers conducted trials in developing countries, like in Africa and Thailand, testing simpler, much cheaper AZT regimens against a placebo.
against a placebo, even though the effective 076 regimen existed.
Correct. The argument was that the 076 regimen was completely unaffordable and unavailable in those countries anyway. They wanted to find a regimen that could be used there.
But critics, like Marcy Angel, were fierce. She compared it directly to Tuskegee.
She did. Her point was that researchers violated the fundamental principle that the well-being of the subject must always take precedence over the interests of science. By giving pregnant women a placebo when a known effective preventative existed, even if expensive, they were treating those women merely as means to an end, finding a cheaper solution.
Denying them the best-known standard of care, regardless of local availability.
That was her argument. But others, like Baruch Brody, offered a counter-argument focused on the practical reality.
What was Brody's take?
Brody argued that you only commit an injustice if you deny subjects a treatment that they realistically should have access to, given the healthcare resources available in that specific country.
So, since the expensive 076 regimen was totally out of reach locally, giving them a placebo wasn't denying them anything they would have actually received anyway?
That's the core of his defense. They weren't made worse off than they already were outside the trial. This highlights a massive debate. Should ethical standards be universal, based on the best care available anywhere, or should they be relative to the local context?
A really difficult question with huge implications, and even setting aside these big structural debates, just getting truly informed consent can be incredibly challenging on the ground.
Oh, absolutely. Think about patients who are very sick. They might be desperate. They might agree to almost anything, maybe not fully grasping the risks or having unrealistic hopes about a cure.
So is their consent truly voluntary? Is it fully informed? It gets blurry.
It really does. And then there's the issue of payments. Can large payments constitute undue inducement, essentially coercing people, especially poor people, into participating when they might otherwise not?
Another tricky line to walk. And this brings us to research involving vulnerable populations, people who might be easily exploited or unable to fully consent.
Yeah, there's a real tension here. We need research to help these groups, children, people with mental impairments, prisoners, but they also need extra protection.
So for children, obviously they can't consent themselves. Parents or guardians provide proxy consent.
Right, but ethical guidelines, especially in the U.S. under DHHS rules, also often require the child's assent, their agreement, particularly if the research isn't expected to benefit them directly, non-therapeutic, and involves more than minimal risk.
Assent, that's an important addition. And what about people who are institutionalized or have cognitive impairments?
They're particularly vulnerable to coercion or undue influence, things that might seem like minor perks to us, a bit of extra attention, small privileges, small amounts of money, could feel like huge incentives to someone in an institution, potentially clouding their judgment about participating.
Undermining genuine voluntariness.
Exactly. And this concern about vulnerability and potential exploitation loops back to research in developing countries.
Right, the justice issue again. The criticism is that researchers from wealthy countries might go to poorer countries, conduct trials on the population there because it's cheaper, or regulations are perhaps less strict.
But then the treatments developed from that research mainly benefit people back in the wealthy countries. The participants themselves or their communities might not see the benefit.
That sounds like straightforward exploitation. How do ethicists like Brody suggest avoiding that?
Brody's view, which is quite influential, is that the key is ensuring the participants themselves get a fair share of the benefits from the research.
What does that mean in practice?
Often, it means guaranteeing them continued access to the treatment if it proves effective in the trial, even after the study ends, or ensuring other tangible health benefits are provided to the community. It's about preventing the subjects from being used solely for others' gain.
Making sure there's a direct, tangible benefit flowing back to those who took the risks.
Precisely. Now, if we step back and look at this through the lens of major ethical theories, you see these tensions reflected clearly.
How would, say, utilitarianism view human research?
Utilitarianism is focused on maximizing overall good consequences. So it would likely justify human research quite strongly if the research leads to the greatest good for the greatest number.
So those controversial AZT trials might be seen as justified if they quickly led to a cheap, effective treatment that saved many more lives globally, even with the placebo issue.
Potentially, yes. A utilitarian calculation would weigh the harm to the placebo group against the massive potential benefit to future populations.
But what about a Kantian perspective, focused on duties and rights?
Kantian ethics, with its emphasis on never treating persons merely as a means to an end, takes a much stricter view. It strongly supports the requirement for informed consent.
So it would condemn Tuskegee outright.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because the subjects were deceived and used purely as tools for scientific observation, violating their fundamental dignity and autonomy. Kantian principles would also likely condemn withholding known effective treatment, as in the AZT placebo debate, because again, it treats the subject as just a data point.
Okay, and finally, Rawls' theory of justice, with its focus on the least well-off.
Rawls argues that social and economic inequalities are only justified if they benefit the least advantaged members of society. Applied to research, this theory would likely condemn studies that predominantly use poor or vulnerable populations to develop treatments that mainly benefit wealthier populations.
It suggests research priorities should perhaps focus more on helping the neediest groups first.
That's a strong implication, yes. It pushes for a fairer distribution of both the burdens and the benefits of medical research.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive has really walked us through the essentials. We've seen why clinical trials are needed, how they work things like control groups, blinding, randomization.
And we've covered the core ethical pillars, autonomy, beneficence, and justice, that underpin the rules like informed consent, risk-benefit assessment, and fair subject selection.
Plus, we've wrestled with those really tough conflicts. The equipoise dilemma, the ethics of placebo use, protecting vulnerable subjects, and ensuring justice in global research.
It always comes back to balancing competing values. And maybe a final thought to leave you with, drawn from one of the cases in the source material.
Yeah.
Think about a trial for a potentially life-saving cancer drug. It starts showing amazing results early on, way better than the standard treatment.
Okay, great news for the patients.
Absolutely. But here's the dilemma. Should the researchers stop the trial right now to give everyone, including those in the control group, this clearly superior drug? That fulfills the duty of beneficence to the current participants.
Seems like the obvious ethical choice for them.
But stopping the trial early might mean you don't gather enough long-term data. Maybe there are rare side effects. Maybe you won't be absolutely certain how much better it is, which could affect its approval, or how doctors use it later. Stopping early compromises the scientific rigor needed to ensure the greatest benefit for future patients.
Wow. So you're caught between helping the people in the trial now versus potentially helping many more people later with more robust data.
Exactly. That agonizing choice, the doctor's duty to the individual patient versus their researcher's duty to gain knowledge for society, that captures the razor's edge of human research ethics.
Yeah.
It's a constant balancing act every single time science and the duty to care intersect.
A really powerful point to end on. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.